Australia, where we're losing a lot of our citizens, the deaths are quite low. In Australia, it sits at just around 1 per 100,000. Denmark actually sits just over 0.6 per 100,000. And I'm just going to rush through this so that we can save time. Let's look at corruption. The corruption indicators. Now, if you go to the next slide that we have there, again, the same thing. At Venezuela, it's sitting at where the rule of law index score is 0.3. The corruption factor that you see there is the level of public sector corruption based on research and opinions, sits on around 20. That's the score that they are at. And again, you look at the other countries where the score is higher, it is lower. So the higher your score of rule of law index, the lower your corruption index is as well. And you look at general poverty, it also decreases as the rule of law strengthens. I'm not going to waste your time with a lot of these graphs, but you can see there, it's the same countries. We look at Ethiopia, we're looking at number of people, percentage of population living at below $5.50 per day. In Ethiopia, over 80% of the population in the country, and the rule of law index sits below 0.4 on the scoring rate. Where in countries like Sweden, where it's higher, close to 0.9, there's virtually nobody living at less than $5.50 per day. And if you look at the next slide, child poverty decreases as well, and so on and so forth. Income inequality and the rule of law as well. You realize that income inequality also drops as the rule of law strengthens. And this actually shows that, and the final one that I want to just point to before I get into the issue of technology is the last slide. If you go further, females with bank accounts and the rule of law. This was quite startling when this research was done. They realized that as the rule of law index actually increased in a country, you actually saw an increase in the number of females who held bank accounts. Quite interesting. Again, the same offenders, the same ones are the same countries that, with the higher score, are the ones where you've got more females with holding bank accounts. And these are just some of the indicators that are there. And what I wanted to get to next, in order to save time, the chair here told me that if I could do this in 20 minutes, he would service. Look, one thing that I want to point to is that the fourth industrial revolution, which has become a concept that everybody speaks about, sees the convergence of digital, biological, and physical innovations, and has already brought us developments like artificial intelligence, automation, 3D printing, which deliver the promise of a better and more convenient way of working and improvement to lives in general for many people. The legal sector, however, whilst it's quite slow to adapt than other industries, what we've seen here is that that's one of the industries that we serve mainly. We've seen that it has also been disrupted and at the same time enabled by advances in technology. Technology has already transformed every segment of the legal ecosystem. And what we've seen here is that it has enabled lawmakers as well to be able to develop and implement and apply law faster and more efficiently, minimizing backlogs in the delivery of legal services, and also ensuring that there's greater access to law for all. And also, what technology has done is that it also helped to enhance the capacity of members of parliament using ICT policy and governance to conduct oversight, lawmaking, and public participation. The one thing that it does, and we spoke about efficiency, one of the things that we see as well is that this has brought about globalization, virtualization, where people are area. So there's a lot of shuttling of people between. So there are many benefits that technology can bring. There are things like, simple things like video conferencing. I'd like to see the day that parliamentarians can sit across various locations and be able to have parliament. We'll probably have less fistfights because they will not be in close proximity with each other. But what it means is that you could save a lot of money where there'll be less travel across the world, across the globe, across the country for people to come and sit together. They could meet virtually. But the other thing as well is to be able to do research across the world, researching legislation from other countries, cross-referencing because of the platforms that we've built that allow people to cross-reference and read multiples and thousands of documents that previously you would have needed days and months to read. You can do in a matter of minutes and seconds in some cases through technology and some of the platforms we've built. So I'm aware at this stage that the South African Parliament itself is assessing the opportunities and threats presented by the fourth industrial revolution. And it is stated that this area presents very significant opportunities. That is to better access to services, new ways for citizens to connect to each other, and also to reduce risks. and also making sure that we reduce things like unequal access to benefits, employment displacement, and things like those. I've already spoken about the financial benefits that it actually bring. Let's talk about some of the innovative technologies that we've already seen. Now, we've seen a lot of other technologies and offerings that have improved legal research. I spoke about cross-referencing and stuff like that from the artificial intelligence and platforms that we built. But one of the things that lawyers battle with today, for instance, and I think people who write legislation and big documents, is that in order to write going forward, you always have to look back. And that's how lawyers practiced. And legislators have to worry about what did the law say in years gone by, so that they can think about what happens going forward. There are other legal processes, for instance, that I can talk about that that have been automated through artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud automation. And one of the things that we now have is that cloud robotics now also allows machines to share data with one another. So you could have machines sitting across various locations. They don't have to be close to each other. If there's data sitting on this machine here that you've stored, another machine sitting in another area, they'll be able to talk to each other and start sharing their data and comparing notes in the same way that you and I would have to fly and sit next to each other to do that. But they can handle volumes of data that you and I would never be able to handle even in a year. And there are other additional elements that they brought in, like natural language processing, pattern recognition, that make up artificial intelligence. And how that helps is that we would have to analyze and find patterns where people have written documents. These machines are able to see patterns between different people and actually correlate those and bring them together. And because of this, we've seen other things through artificial intelligence, like there's a pro bono robot lawyer called Do Not Pay. It's the first artificial intelligent lawyer. And the first artificial intelligent lawyer built by IBM on their cognitive processing platform, getting access to legal services, information and service providers for entrepreneurs. So they can go in, they don't have to consult a lawyer, they go on their website, they can buy the service they're looking for up front. And closer to home, in South Africa, we've got another example called Legal Legends, which allows small businesses to purchase legal services at fixed upfront prices on its platform. So there are things that people are starting to do in the legal area that will impact how legal profession is actually practiced going forward. And ladies and gentlemen, these developments are just an illustration of how technology is impacting how lawyers work. We've got many others that we can talk about. And LexisNexis globally, because of our push for the rule of law, we have got other technologies that I will take you very quickly in 5 minutes and show you. I think my slide is up, yes. So we've got a few technologies here. So I'll show you quickly some of those. If you go to the next slide. We've got let's talk about that drafting tool. So we've got 4 tools that I want to talk about. We've got Legal PSL, Lexis PSL, which is a web-based solution. And what that web-based solution does, it allows you to access legal advice basically at the strike of a key, where you would have had to phone a lawyer to get an opinion in areas where you are not an expert. You're able to go into this area, and it covers various and many practice areas. You're able to get that on your desktop. Actually, it's actually fully mobile as well. And in addition to that, we've got something called Lexis Library UK. And this is basically a library solution which allows you to access legislation, case law, commentaries, and stuff like that. And they are cross-referenceable. And it's all basically based on laws and legislation coming out of the UK, which are used and referenced quite a lot by legislators in what we find on the African continent. But allied to that, we've got something called Lexis Library South Africa, which then houses all the content for all the African countries on the continent. And what you're able to do is probably one of the broadest and most complete databases of legislation, of case law, and it allows you to cross-reference across all platforms. So you can look at what legislation looks like on a particular subject in Kenya, in Ghana, in Mauritius, in South Africa, in Botswana, in Lesotho, in Swaziland, in Zambia, Zimbabwe. That's all the countries that and some of the few countries that we're covering among the many that are there. And these ones, what they've been able to do is to be able to break down work that is painstaking, that takes many hours. Unfortunately, because of lack of time, I'm actually having to rush through these. And then, but Lexis Drafting, or Lexis Draft, which is up there, let's just talk about it because I think it's probably the one that's most relevant here. What Lexis Draft allows us to do is it's an award-winning thing, and it allows anyone who's drafting a legal document to be able to work in Word, and at the same time be able to access pieces of legislation that you might want to integrate in the document that you're writing without leaving your Word document. So previously, you would be writing on a Word document, you'd be typing here, and you wanted to see a piece of legislation from Kenya, you'd have to get out, go into a library, take a book that shows you a piece of legislation from Kenya. So within your Word document, you're able to, as you're writing, to call up a piece of legislation, refer to it, and you can copy, cut, and paste and put it into the document that you're actually writing, obviously citing as if you wanted to cite it. So that's one of the things it's able to do. And it's also able to allow you to do proofreading. One of the biggest risks in legislative drafting, as well as document writing for legal professionals, is to write something and have to employ people to reduce risk, to actually read it, proofread, make sure that it's there. It's got something built into it called Eagle Eye. And what Eagle Eye will do, within a matter of seconds, it will proofread a document of thousands of pages and tell you exactly where there are errors. And it also looks at other things in there as well, such as, I spoke about citations. When you've cited something, and you've incorrectly cited an incorrect piece of legislation, it will show you, it corrects many other things. But the good thing about it is that you do not get to leave the document that you're working within. It links in very nicely with another solution called LexisSmart Precedents, because as a drafter and a writer of legal documents, one of the most painful things is to have to rewrite a document over and over and over. The most valuable thing I've learned to lawyers, I've got a commercial and technology background. I learned that the most prized item for a lawyer or for legal mind is precedent. And as a result, LexisSmart Precedents allows you to access hundreds of precedents, the smart precedents that we have, and you can integrate them through LexisDraft into your documents that you're writing. But it allows you also take your own precedents and turn them into forms that you can bank and you can keep on reusing. And it's got the ability to check the citations that you've actually in there. Lawyers are always citing case law. When you've cited case law in there, it's able to go in and say, you've cited this case, particular case here, it's not good law anymore because there's a new finding in a different court on this particular one here. So these are some of the few things that I can do, but out of respect for time, I'd like to stop here. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a stand outside where we'll be available if you wanted to talk to us a bit further about this, and we'll have our cards so that we can contact you. Thank you very much.
And I really apologize for having to rush you in this very exciting discussion. Lawyers are always jittery discussing technology because they seem to see their work slipping away. But could we have a discussion of the two presentations? Yes. Could I have an indication on how many people want to make a contribution? One, okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Any other? Okay, let's start with those 3.
Thank you very much. My question goes to the first presenter. I would like to hear from you, say something on the right to fair and decent work in relation to technology. I have in mind the use of AIs, the artificial intelligence, and the issues of automation. Because I read somewhere where it said by at least 2020, 85% of all customer interactions will be handled without a human agent. Already that's a threat to the right to fair and decent work. So as a drafter and as an advisor to the members of parliament, how do you balance between the two? The right to fair and decent work, and then the advancement of technology in a country. Thank you very much.
Second question, the only sheriff in town.
Yes, thank you very much for LexisNexis. I think the question is on e-parliament. I think a lot of our concern, and you alluded to it, is how we can transform parliament where they became user-friendly by way of technology. So I don't know whether you have a program where you can integrate technology and public participation, technology and legislative drafting. I think the member who was ahead of you also talked about petitions, where we can even process petitions without even having a sitting in parliament. I think now technology is able to take us there. Are you thinking of something like that? E-Parliament? Thank you.
The third question, yeah.
Thank you very much, Pius. Mine is not a question, but rather an advice. This is what I consider the relevance of the colloquium, the use of technology. As we can see, we normally meet after every 2 years, which is quite a long time to share experience among ourselves. But through the use of technology, I'm sure we can be effective in our workings. Since the morning session, we have, colleagues have shared a number of cases from their respective jurisdictions. I was about to pose an advice to the Secretariat and rather to the coming Council, day after tomorrow, I think, to make sure that these cases which were shared by colleagues, Sheriff Sam and other colleagues, are accessed through our website, the Colloquium website. We need to have the repository of cases so that colleagues can, wherever they are, can access number of precedents happening elsewhere within Africa. So I thought that this is very important at the gaps of 2 years before we meet and share experiences among ourselves, but at least we can use technology to get access to several cases, to several developments happening in our jurisdictions. Thank you.
I like that last bit. I'm sure Mr. Tabo will come up with a solution for us. Maybe a platform that the colloquium can use to harness the information that we have. Any other questions or comments? Maybe as you're thinking about them, I'll just raise, of course, the issue of spread to the first presenter, Maristella, on, okay, we're not in the sense that the threat or the effect of misinformation, disinformation is not given adequate coverage. Obviously at the expense of freedom of expression, which goes without saying. But when I look at the solutions that you proposed to counter misinformation, disinformation, it seems to be a very soft approach. You seem to rely, or you want us to rely on the goodness of the misinformers, that they will be encouraged not to misinform. And yet the effects of this can be far-reaching. So I don't know to what extent that can be addressed. And of course, on social media, you said it is open and it's possible to, it gives a platform to get differing opinions. But we know that on Twitter, you can get blocked or unblocked and unfollowed. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at these things. But if I unfollow you, I think you may not be able to read what I am posting. And then, well, you brought it out in the last slides, but not so clearly. I think whereas we focus a lot on government, especially in the sphere of human rights, but I think the tech companies are the new government as far as the dangers around social media and technology would be. And before they run away with it, it may be, in my view, important to focus. I think there's a case you gave the example where an election was kind of interfered with through data. But I don't know whether governments were involved particularly in that particular case. It seems to have been candidates working together with technology companies. So as we are moving along this technology journey, do you think that we are handing too much power and control to the tech companies while we are keeping an eye on the government and we are letting them get away with it? Thanks.
Thank you very much. My question is to Mary Stella. I hope I got her name right. This with regards to your observation that most countries do not have data protection laws. And I believe, just following what the moderator has said, many countries are very wary of opening up that space because of what the tech companies are doing. I know the GDPRs are also providing various regulations, particularly to companies that are controlling our technology. I can speak for Kenya, for example. We are coming up with a data protection bill currently, and some of the concerns that have been raised by most of the stakeholders are that some information is collected. Like, for example, we have simple information, like we have a money transfer system called M-Pesa, where you have to give your details to the agents, but you don't know where that information is going. We don't know which servers contain them, so these are used by criminals to defraud people, and also just probably use your identification information to cheat and defraud the country. So I think some of the concerns concerning this whole opening up the space of technology is, do we have guidelines, or rather do we have the capabilities as countries to be able to ensure that the data that has been protected is, that has been collected is properly kept and protected, and there is no abuse to that? And then another aspect that I saw in the GDPRs, I think you're conversant with that, is the issue of penalties, whereby we're having very punitive penalties that are being given even by the EU to tech companies in case of data being mismanaged. And so, like, in one of our clauses in the law, we are actually saying that a company that will be found to have not followed the law, as it were, will be penalized to pay at least 50% of its turnover, which is very, very punitive. So I see most countries are very wary of coming up with all these laws because of the issue of management of the data that will be collected. I just don't know, what are your thoughts around that space? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions, and I hope I can address them. On the issue of fair and decent work when it comes to automation, I do share your concerns too, because in this digital era, what we are seeing, and even as my colleague was presenting, he talked about the digital lawyer. And as a lawyer, maybe I should be concerned the fact that somebody will find it better to deal with a machine as opposed to me, and there I'm losing my fees. So I do share your concerns. And while in education, sometimes they do have quotas. For example, you can state that a certain percentage of people will be, certain students, a certain percentage of students will be from a certain community, for example, to address issues of marginalization or gender discrimination. But I don't know whether the same can be used when it comes to automation, because at the end of the day, as I said, it's about the profit margin, and businesses care about their profit margin. And increasingly, we are seeing businesses being attracted to reducing their overhead when it comes to remuneration. So I do share your concerns. I can't say I have a solution unless my colleague will help me in that regard. I don't know whether I have a solution in that regard. In this digital age, we are increasingly seeing loss of work, especially in the informal sector, and even now in the informal sector. So there, I really can't help you. I also share your concerns. For the second question, about approaches to misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, the reason I am adopting soft approaches, because I don't know if when you talk about hard approaches, what I was trying to discourage were approaches that will end up infringing on the right of access to information and freedom of expression. And this is seen through restrictive laws, as I talked about, as well as internet shutdowns and network interruptions. This is what I'm trying. This is what, as CSOs who are calling for the who are calling against infringement of the right to access to information and freedom of expression. We are calling against such actions. So what we are pushing for is, public education. How do we address this issue of misinformation and disinformation? Sometimes it's not deliberate misinformation. Sometimes it's just you receive a video, you think it's relevant to the context, and you share it. And before you know it, it has become viral, and yet it's viral in the wrong context. But when we educate the public about verifying fast information that you receive before sharing it out, it's in some way helps to mitigate the problems of misinformation. And this is especially important because when you send out wrong information and it goes viral, it's harder to retract a statement as opposed to, the fast impact that juicy news has. So in this case, we're trying to encourage public education in such a way that audiences and content and users of social media are well informed of how to use these platforms responsibly. When it comes to giving tech companies the new government, I did say that in this day and age, when it comes to technology and human rights, we can't actually, we have to include businesses when it comes to this discussion, and that's because they are the people who make these technologies. They are the people who are privy to the community standards. They are the people who are privy to the policies behind this. And if they are able to adopt a human rights approach when it comes to the development of these digital technologies, if they're able to do periodic human rights impact assessments to how their products impact the human rights balance, then they are able to, in a certain way, tailor their products in such a way that they contribute to the human rights argument as opposed to being detrimental to it. And that is what I was trying to emphasize with my discussion. We can't move away from the fact that they have such an impact these days when it comes to the digital era that, yes, they might be a sort of new government because they are the ones who are largely controlling this space. Finally, when it comes to data protection laws and whether this information is stored properly, this is the reason why we are encouraging the legislators to adopt legislation when it comes to data protection. Because if the legislation is able to provide limitations and at least demarcations on what information is being collected, who is collecting this information, and what responsibility they have towards this information, then we can be able to restrict misuse of such information in the hands of businesses or individuals or other people who have malice towards this information. So we need more legislation just to say, this is the information being collected by who, being stored how, what are the safeguards being given in regards to storage of this information, who is allowed to use this information, for how long is this information stored in the hands of so-and-so, and what rights do I have when it comes to this information? If it's my information, do I have access to a framework that is very comprehensive and understandable that can direct businesses, citizens, and governments in this regard? Thank you.
Okay.
The questions that I had the first one was, let me just delve a little bit into that one about the right to fair and decent employment. I don't think you should fear at all, because, and I'll tell you why. The reason why I say that is because first of all, whilst there's automation and it seems to threaten the practice of law, what we should not forget is that technology tends to be exciting, yes, and there's a lot to speak about, but let's not forget that law is an industry that's built around people. So we are presenting a paper somewhere where, after research, we realized that there are basic things that you still need in law. You need human intelligence, you need the capacity for negotiation, emotional intelligence, and the ability to make correct judgment calls. Machines can't do that. So, and it's still going to rely on human interactions and our emotions and drawing on experience and insight to generate valuable strategic counsel. For instance, machines need volumes and volumes and volumes of data before they can give you a sensible decision. So there are areas of law where there aren't thousands of precedents, where there's new precedent that's been set. Machines will never be able to apply their emotional intelligence to come up with an answer to a question that might arise out of an area like that. So you shouldn't fear. And the other thing is that whilst there have been research that said that within 20 years, I mean, there was one research that within 20 years, 47% of American jobs in the legal profession would have been phased out. There's been other studies, for instance, that more recent ones. There was a center of they call it the European Economic Research in Mannheim. They disputed these Lumi stats, and what they said was that they believe that in America only 9% of the jobs will be impacted in the legal area, in the legal profession, and only 10% in the UK. Now, the reason why they said this is that you cannot automate, and we know that from writing, from doing software development, we cannot automate, for instance, a whole job, but we can automate aspects and portions of your jobs. So you'll find that it's the menial tasks within the legal process that are getting automated. What it's doing, it's simply shifting skills upward. So where you had a lot of junior lawyers who were doing very menial tasks, like I spoke about proofreading, for instance. I visited advocates here in Senton a few years ago, looking at what they were doing. And they had a lot of junior counsel who were sitting there, their job was just to read and proofread stuff that was written by somebody else. That's the stuff that's been taken out. So those skills can be used, that's what's been taken out. Those skills will now be shifted upward. So what's going to happen is that I think, as we speak to academics and universities, we're seeing that lawyers are being taught other skills that are probably upstream. And the downstream stuff in law can be done by machines. To sit and proofread something and make sure that somebody has cited the correct legislation, correct case law, is something that a machine can do, and you can do that. But to craft an argument, you can only analyze trends in arguments, but you will still have to craft an argument yourself. I'm not a lawyer, but having observed what they do and where we're going, I don't think you should fear. I think it's going to be aspects and portions of your jobs that are under threat, but not whole jobs. You cannot replace a lawyer. You will replace certain tasks within the day of a lawyer, which should make you, if you're a lawyer who's billing on hours, it should make you more profitable because you spend your time on more profitable things. That was on that one. Hope I've assisted well and not confused matters even more there. The other question that was there was a question regarding e-parliament and whether we don't have technologies that can actually bring that to fruition. They are there already. So LexisNexis as a company is not looking at doing anything like that. But as with courts, whilst we talk like this, courts still sit. You know, a judge still wants to sit at the bench, and somebody needs to be there, counsel have to be there, and people have to be there. But we're now starting to see that people are now testifying in camera, so it's going in that direction. But as far as the collection of documents and stuff like the storage of those technologies are there. I think it depends on parliamentarians to make sure that you get the right legislation that allows you to do those things and use those technologies. I think as business, we are quite concerned as well not to rush ahead to the detriment of society. So whilst we create these technologies, it's okay to use them in small amounts and small doses. We are cognizant of the fact that law is practiced. I always say law is one of those professions that's practiced looking backward, and it's for the protection of society. If lawyers were on the forefront of technology, I think things like precedent would count for nothing. So we're applying it very responsibly. The technologies are there. I think it's up to legislators and lawyers to sit with us and debate about which technologies are there, which ones are relevant. It's very difficult for us to prescribe, but they're there. We use them in the corporate world. We use them for board meetings, and I think they can be applied in your environment as well. We just have to know which ones are safe for use and which ones are not safe for use. Some of the small things, as an electronic digital signature, as the real thing that you'll be able to work on the basis of that, for instance. But it's already there. We're signing a lot of our resolutions as a company electronically. I sit in Durban, and head office is in Durban, but half the executive team is in Johannesburg, and my other colleague is in Cape Town, the three of us in Durban. And sometimes we meet virtually, resolutions need to be signed, and what we do is they email it to me, I sign it on my phone. And we've accepted that and I've put the signature there. It signs it, we're able to read it, proofread it, and do things like that. So it's when each part that has to use the technology is willing and ready to accept it, and when there's agreement among all the users and the constituencies that we are happy to accept a digital signature, just as an example. If you give me a digital signature, I'm happy to accept it, that's fine. We are in the process of